Everyone, we're glad you could join us for our January online meetup. Tonight we're having Beth Soderberg, which I did write correctly, oh, who's going to share about not being afraid. No, that was my wording. With building your own themes with the full site editor. So I'm going to give her the floor.
All
And
right.
do you prefer questions at the end or as you go along?
I think we should do questions as we go because this is a pretty small group, which is great and
Yeah.
very different than um, how I've presented this information in the past. So feel free to, I think you can raise your hand in Zoom, or otherwise put things in the chat. I may not see them right away if they're in the chat. Let me see.
Okay, I do see raised hands. It's under React.
Aha. Okay. I popped the chat out, so now I'll actually see it if you say something there. Um, but I think I appreciate you all introducing yourselves. It gives me a much better sense of how to approach this. Um, so I'm going to introduce myself and then we're going to dive in. The one thing that you need to know about me and small group settings in particular, though this is also true with large group settings, is that there are no stupid questions. This is a safe space. Don't hesitate. I know we've got some people who are really experienced with other frameworks within WordPress. Don't hesitate to, even if you're not sure what the right words are, ask your questions. So, um, this talk is called Getting Comfortable with Full Site Editing Theme Development. Thank you, AI and Kim, because of course, my name for this was intimidating sounding, which I didn't realize until Kim told me that, but it was. Um, I am outside of Washington, D.C. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia. I have been working with WordPress since 2010, 2009-ish, maybe. Um, and have been running my business, which is now called Beth Studio, for 10 years next month. Um, I know it's like shocking. Um, so I am now the CEO and lead developer. We have a team of 5, and we focus on full site editing themes almost exclusively. We have other sites that are older that we support, and we have a few that are inherited that we support from other agencies. Um, but anything new that we're building or anything that we're refactoring, we are using full site editing as our baseline. Um, so that's a little bit about me. I have also been involved in the WordPress like meetup space and have the DC meetup is now on hiatus, but I've been involved in that for a long time, which is why I know some of the folks on this call. So it's good to see you. All right, so getting into things, we are first going to go back to the beginning because especially, and I think this group is really good for this, we've got people coming at it from all different places. And I love what our new friend from Colorado was saying about not holding ourselves back. But in order to understand where we are, and honestly, in order to demystify some of where we are, I have found it very helpful to think about it and explain it to other people in terms of the whole history of WordPress theming, because you'll find a developer who's really comfortable building things in a certain way, and it's totally related to how you would do this in full site editing. It's just connecting those dots. So we're going to go back. Our very first WordPress default theme was called Classic. It was the default prior to WordPress 1.2. It looked like this. And the theme structure was this, which kind of looks familiar. I mean, there's a few things in here that we always must have still. Our index file, our style file, our functions file, and some things that have gone by the wayside, like our comments pop-up file. So this is how the theme structure started, though, right? And I'm using default themes as a baseline for sort of where the best practices were going with WordPress core and developing themes using those best practices, not necessarily some of these other frameworks. I know they all exist. We'll talk about them, but that's my thinking. So then we have default, which is actually the name, the theme name of Kubrick. So this was the default theme for WordPress during the period where it was really gaining traction and people were starting to notice beyond the little community that had formed that it existed. And so a lot of us are very familiar with this as the original default WordPress theme. So, and I did not do this again for this meetup. I'm sorry. I installed all these themes locally and took screenshots for this talk. And I had to fix a lot of errors in the theme to get this screenshot of Kubrick. So I wasn't doing that again. But here you can start to see that you're getting the real outline of how theme development used to be. And by that I mean theme development from like 2010 to about 2019. So we've got our standard, if you were to look at the template hierarchy, this is all stuff that's in there. Um, our standard default files for things like the footer and the header, and we've got an images directory. The idea of having a directory at all is great. And this is the first time that appears. And it doesn't appear again for a while. Um, so you got a lot of your default things. This screenshot PNG, which is the like little thumbnail when you're looking at your theme in your theme admin, shows up here, stuff like that. Okay, then introducing non-default. The Genesis framework was released in February 2010, and this came about because people were starting to try and use WordPress in ways beyond just blogging, right? This was around the same time that WordPress 3.0 was being released. So we were actually getting full-fledged content management features, and there just wasn't a lot of tooling there to figure out how to build things on it. And so the Genesis framework was one of the early ones to try and do that. And a lot of people who started building themes at this time started with Genesis. Then we have the 2010 theme, which looked like this and is still looking pretty similar. Not too many major adjustments. Then introduce advanced custom fields. Custom fields had been part of WordPress core since WordPress 3.0, but they were really hard to use. They're still really hard to use in their native form. And advanced custom fields basically took the core functionality that was there and put a UI layer over it that made it possible to be really robust and easy for people to use with good documentation. And I don't remember exactly how long, but for the longest time, it was just this one guy. And so, I know it's now owned by a big company and all of that, but this, the degree of success that it had when one person was behind it was stunning. And it's because it provided something that people really needed in order to be able to use the feature. And without custom fields, you really can't have a CMS. So then we enter WP Bakery, which still exists. And I see Kim's making a face, and I feel the same way. It is the original, what we could call page builder. So this is one of our first attempts at full site editing. And I have to say, as somebody who has, we have one site that we inherited that uses WP Bakery, you can tell it was the first. It has not aged well. I wouldn't recommend it, but people were trying to fill that need of, how do we make it so that it's possible to understand what we're seeing in the back end of the site in the context of what will be on the end of the site. Um, then we have underscores. Underscores is a base theme framework, very, very lean, and was the basis for default themes from 2012 through, I think, 2019, maybe, until we got to the Gutenberg friendly themes, really. And I used this for many years. 2012, here we go. Okay, so 2012, we start to actually get more robust thinking in terms of what could be in the theme. We've got all this stuff related to post formats. Um, you're starting to see the need for actual partials. They're not being used yet. And so um, then we have Divi. Divi's still in use. I'm not a Divi person. This is no beef with Divi. However, I believe that there have been several major overhauls of Divi since this time. So I'm not an expert in what those are, but the original Divi, again, probably when you look at it now, doesn't age well, but the current Divi is very different than the original. Beaver Builder, another one that I never really want to work with again. Um, and, but there was a time when it was one of the easier to use theme frameworks to make something where you could see what was happening in the back end and the front end. I had a client who I told him in the interview phase that if he made me build it in Beaver Builder, I would, because Gutenberg had just been released and it wasn't ready for production yet. But that he was going to need a new website because it wouldn't age well. And that is exactly what happened. Um, and that client is still a client, though different company. And every once in a while, he brings up how he hired me because I told him that he was wrong. And, you know, I would build it this way if he made me. It's the only site I've ever built using it. And what was interesting watching it, we had all this documentation, all this training, and even with all that documentation and training over time, it slowly degraded because different users did things differently and everything was manual. So that's one of the issues that a lot of these early page builder type things have. Elementor. I know we have an Elementor expert here. I also have, I think, one site right now in Elementor that we inherited. And I will say this is better than some of the other ones in terms of your ability to port different things. However, we have run into some stuff where it's like, oh gosh, we actually have to do this on every page, which is my problem with this type of theme framework. Um, but this one has taken over in terms of dominance. Probably this one and then Divi at this point. And I think, did Elementor just release a new version too? I feel like there's new versions of both Elementor and Divi that have improved a lot recently. Um, okay, so then we get back to our regular base themes. We've got 2017, it looks like that. And thank goodness we finally have partials and the idea of template parts. This is where you're starting to really expand into what in my head was the like fully formed original theming structure for WordPress, where there really were best practices. There was really a lot of standardization across development studios, um, and people were mostly building their sites the same way unless they were using a page builder. And generally, most sites had this framework. Things were extended in PHP files using the template hierarchy. People did their own whatever they wanted with CSS and JavaScript. And almost everybody was using advanced custom fields. And a lot of how advanced custom fields started to be used started to mimic the idea that we have now in the block editor of moving content around, where you would have a repeater field, and in that repeater, you'd have different types of patterns. And each pattern would have a whole bunch of fields in it, and then you could move them all around. It was a way to get really custom stuff on the page and have your end editor be able to actually use it. But at the same time, most end editors got massively confused. Most of the like standard content people I've met never realized you could move them around, stuff like that. So it was a little rudimentary, but the ideas were there. Then we have 2019, released in December of 2018, along with Gutenberg. So this was the first one that was really a Gutenberg theme. Yes, I've seen bricks too lately. Um, so the goal of this theme was not to be fancy or beautiful. And in fact, you really couldn't be fancy or beautiful with Gutenberg at this time. So it was to prove the thesis that it was possible. And so you start to see some real big shifts in how things are structured. You've got the introduction of JSON. You've got your style editor files to start editing the CSS for your backend as well as your front end. How this worked at first was incredibly horrible, very difficult to work with, and very hard to ensure consistency between the two things. One of the things that has shifted over time is that, frankly, how CSS is written in these types of themes is completely different than in the pre-2019 themes, because in order to compile CSS so that your editor styling and your front end styling are the same, you have to use the same base type units. Before 2019, most custom themes were using base 10 units for their themes, which made the math really easy. 1.6 rems was 16 pixels. The problem is you can't compile that and apply it to the backend editor, which is using 16 pixels as its base size. So you've seen, and there was a whole debate. If you get into the weeds of track and all of that, there was a whole debate over what to do about this. And really, everyone's just using base 16 now. And it stinks because now I have to have that like silly calculator open all the time. But in any case, that's a bit in the weeds, and I recognize that. I have been doing this for a long time. Okay, so then Seedlit was a theme that was released by Automatic in June of 2020. I was forced to use it to build two sites, and it is horrible. And the idea, they were trying to figure out how to actually build. And this was an early attempt at a standard way of building with Gutenberg, and it was really hard to use. They had a bajillion and 10 different whatchamacallits, variables, CSS variables. The CSS variables were like just so many, they were coming out of your ears, and it was impossible to see what you needed to modify in order to do anything you wanted to do. So it was a little bit too heavy-handed for my taste. Then we have the release of 2020, and we start to get more elegant again. It's not completely there, but it's a massive improvement over 2019 in terms of how we're structuring things, how we're thinking about things. It's more of a hybrid. And this is truly the hybrid theme era. So, hybrid themes are really hard to work with. They were never meant to be a permanent solution, but there had to be a bridge from the old way to the new way. And so around this time, you still have your JavaScript functionality and all the ways you can do that in Gutenberg, but you also still have your functions file and all of your old PHP stuff that you're familiar with, and they're kind of working together. And what was happening is if you were building themes this way at this time, A, there were not a lot of us doing it. So there was very little to reference. And you would run up against stuff all the time where you're like, I bet I can do this in Gutenberg. Oh, no, I can't. I guess I have to do that the old way and this part the new way. And it was very disorienting. So thankfully that piece is coming to an end. And then moving through the 2020s, we get much leaner until we get to 2022, which, oh my goodness, is just like, here we have just what we actually need. Um, we have the screenshot, the style sheet, which is required in order for WordPress to see the theme, even though we don't necessarily use it in the same way as we used to pre-Gutenberg. We have our theme.json file, all of that. So, and everything is actually in partials, so you can organize and find things like a totally, you know, rather than having every single thing thrown in the same box. 2023 is similar. It's not changing too much after that. We're just getting more efficient in how we are structuring things. So, stepping back, and this is what unifies all of us, right? Like our goals when building a theme are actually almost always the same, or at least they should be, unless there is I'm going to build this website overnight emergency, something like that. Um, I know we've never done that. No one here has ever done that. Okay, so goals. I've done that. I know Kevin's done that by his face just now. So, all right, so portability. This is my current biggest beef with page builders. It is slightly better than it used to be, but page builders tend to inject code into your content in order to style that content. And that can make it incredibly difficult to migrate to a different system and have clean content. So, part of the reason why I use full site editing Gutenberg first themes is because of this. I don't want extra stuff styling something to be a certain color in my words, right? In my text. Extensibility. You want to be able to build on top of it and have the parts basically be interoperable. There is a whole ecosystem around Elementor, and there's a whole ecosystem around Divi. The same way that there was a whole ecosystem back in the day around Genesis with other plugins and things, add-ons and whatever. But when you're talking about, I just want to build the thing the way I envision it, building off of core itself is going to be the most efficient way to do that. And so that's a lot of why I've made these choices. Um, Accessibility is the same. The leaner, the better. And the cleaner you are starting, the cleaner baseline you're starting from, the better your accessibility is going to be. And you always should be testing. Um, but a lot of the choices you make in the very beginning will make it easier for you later. Eileen, I see your question. A good base FSE theme to start customizing like underscores. And how do you change the font? So both of these questions will be answered later. And the answer is there's not a good base theme. It's different. Um, I know, I believe the last time I saw you in person was probably when I gave my underscores base theme talk in Philadelphia pre-pandemic, Eileen. And the ironic thing about that is that I don't have a base theme anymore, even though I gave talks about base themes for years. I'll explain why in a few minutes. All right, responsivity. Some of the early themes just weren't. This is a standard internet thing now, though, and some of the page builders still struggle. So just it's not that you can't have a full site editing theme that's struggling. You can, especially with columns. But um, there's a lot of defaults built in, and your site will keep inheriting what's coming in through WordPress core if you're using Gutenberg blocks. Maintainability. This is largely the idea that you don't want to just someone in when folks were introducing themselves was talking about, you know, shepherding a website through whatever plugin issues it was having. The fewer plugins, the better. And because of that philosophy, the less you've got, the simpler it is, the easier it is to maintain. Um, you want it to be durable, you want it to last a long time. I have websites that I built in like 2018, 2019 that I have not rebuilt completely, but are still up, are very functional, and the clients are happy. They're not spending a lot of money, which is good for them. And ultimately, it's good for me too because they're happy. And the point is, this piece of the technology is mature enough that you don't actually have to completely refactor and rebuild things over time. You can, when Gutenberg first came out in 2018, I started to build things in a way where I was hoping that eventually I could take that hybrid stuff out. And I've done that a few times with some of these sites. And it's there's a few of the really early ones that are still a little weird because of that transition, but a lot of things have been maintained now for 7 years and they're okay. And we're not talking about rebuilding them because they're perfectly functional. And so that has been one of the benefits of this with some of my clients because they are overall more focused on what they can do in addition rather than what they can do again, which is more productive for them and for me. Speed, again, the leaner the better. Everybody would like to be the first pig in this race. So that's another reason. And then elegance. I, ironically, in real life, love collections, love art. I have this little line of Legos, little Lego plants across my windowsill because I like collections. In technology land, I don't want extra stuff. I won't find it, I'll forget it. You want it to be as simple as it can be. Okay, so going back, looking at how one builds themes and where I was through these times. In 2010, I was learning. I did not know what I was doing. I was a communications person who accidentally realized that technology was fun. And I also realized that I liked computers and the mix of computers and people rather than just people. So I was figuring out how to build a site, and I was learning largely on Genesis because that was the thing everyone told you to use when you were starting to build sites in 2010. By 2013, I was okay, I need to not work at this nonprofit anymore. I need to get a real job as a developer. And how do I build a site professionally? And this is when I started, and also the larger theming world started to really sink into child theming as a standard for how to do things. So then in 2014, I, at this point, was working as a developer at an agency, figured out a default. I was using 2012 as my parent, and then I had a 2012 child default theme. So I had my customizations, I had a standard workflow for that, and I knew basically where I was starting from with each site. By 2019, I had refactored that to be underscores based. So it had become a true base theme at that point, and a base theme is something that's meant to be bespoke. It's not meant to be a child of anything. And I had one that I was based on underscores that I used for years and modified over time as WordPress core changed. And then in 2019, I tried to modify it to become Gutenberg compatible. And I mean, it was as much as any hybrid theme was, right? Like it just wasn't great. Um, and so by the time we get to 2020, I was still messing with my workflow and trying to figure it out. And the hybrid situation, honestly, this is my like lowest period as a theme developer because it was just not comfortable. Nothing that I was doing was going to be future proof. Nothing I was doing was standard because there was not a standard, and it was very experimental. And then in 2022, things had stabilized enough that I was able to really, with the release of full site editing into core, which it wasn't for a while, right? Again, transitional, um, start to play with full site editing. And it took a little bit of experimentation for anybody that I know who was building themes this way at this time to figure out what we were doing. Um, and a lot of these folks were talking to each other too. So it was one of those like, well, at least we're all in this same boat, not knowing what we're doing. And which is part of where the confidence piece of this comes from. Like, none of this is new to no one, right? Like, every single person I've talked to, no matter what level they are, is like, I don't know how to do that. Do you think this is the right way to do this? And it's all very experimental still. And I think the thing that I have realized, I'm exactly the right age that like when you look at the arc of my development as a developer and growing with the technology, like I've been doing this for 15 years. It's really not that much time. And so, um, which leads me to something that I have seen a lot of folks do. There's a lot of imposter syndrome with developers. There's a lot of I'm not good enough. There's a lot of how do I prove myself? There's a lot of I'm embarrassed to ask questions. And so fundamentally, the question is the goal to write as much custom code as possible. Many people have never been comfortable saying no, but really, the goal should never be to write as much custom code as possible. That will lead to degradation over time. If I got hit by a bus and Kevin inherited all of my sites and I had done this, he would be like, "What? happened to her? Like, why would she do this to me? Okay, so don't do that. Um, I talked through this already, and but this is just for reference. Later, I'll share the link to the slides. Exactly what I was using to build themes at these times. Um, so I experimented, and this starts to answer your question, Eileen, about what I was using for block themes. Block base is still one of the primary themes that I use to start from as a parent. And what I have found with full site editing themes is that the ecosystem has reverted to the child theme best practice. There's not a ton of bespoke ones. Um, so, you know, that that is something that I have found be interesting. There is a plugin called Create Block Theme, and this has been the standard of how to actually, from a process standpoint, make these themes. Um, there was a really good talk at WordCamp San Diego that was not taped. The workshop about Create Block Theme was not taped, but I was in there. There were like 20 of us. It was amazing, and I learned a lot. So let's look at it.
Is that
Um,
was that with Jonathan Bossinger from
no,
Automatic?
it wasn't. It was a woman whose name I completely forget right now. Um, it was a woman. That's all I can tell you.
Ann McCarthy?
Could have been.
Okay.
Could have been. It was someone who had worked on this plugin and really, um, at the time, this plugin wasn't even really all that good. It was still really early on, but you could see where it was going from what you were able to do with it thus far. It wasn't totally ready for prime time at that point. Um, but when you install this, so we have our regular block-based theme, which is going to be our reference parent theme for the purposes of this talk. When you have a block-based theme installed, you'll see the red arrow. You now have an editor button in your admin panel. And when you have a create block theme installed, you have an additional item for create block theme. And in those two, depending on what you're doing. Okay, so the first thing you do, and this is so counterintuitive, um, from anything I had ever been doing before with themes. Set them through the site editor rather than in your theme, which is incredibly uncomfortable if you are used to writing a bunch of code to say, like, these are my colors and whatever. So in here, you have a place to set your layout. And you look at it and you're like, well, what does it mean by content width? And what does it mean by wide width? And what does this padding and all this situation? All I can say is that the content width is when you have one column of content. So this should never be larger than 800 because that's the max that human eyes can really read and you go to the next line. Eye tracking. There's a lot of UX research behind that. And then the wide width is your standard container. Now, you can have other widths, you can add widths, all of this, but how I have found this to be the best use case is to go with standard container and one column of text. If there is something happening in between, fine, but that's a more advanced topic. And then padding and block spacing, I use the block spacing variable to, I always have it match the space in between my paragraphs. So all of the other spacing on the whole site is some multiple of that or fraction of that. But having it your paragraph styling, which is something that you always want the same, is going to get your base space between your blocks, so those default margins, consistent. And I always leave the paddings at 0. I don't know if everybody does that, but the truth is there's like 17 different ways to do this, right? Like some of it is experimenting and figuring it out.
So
Kim?
this would be similar to being global.
Yes. Yeah. You're setting your global defaults. And so it's the same as setting like a base unit for spacing in a more like CSS based way of doing this. Okay, so then font questions. So one thing I don't like about Blockbase is that it installs a bajillion fonts by default. So disable them. But at this point, WordPress core allows you to manipulate fonts through it. And when you have a block-based theme, you go to styles and typography. And if you are using a Google font, you can find it and install it from there. If you are using something from Typekit or My Fonts or any of those, you still have to do it the old way. It's a little janky with the editor, but like it's not the worst it could be. I have seen very few people are now using what used to be Typekit. I think I called it Typekit, but it's really owned by Adobe now, Adobe Fonts. Their licensing situation is out of control. And so people are just not using those fonts unless they have a bajillion dollars and don't care. Um, Everyone else is using a font that they can buy from My Fonts or similar services that is a reasonable price or Google Fonts. And so, but yeah, it's annoying to have to disable all of these, but you can go in here and then find whatever you want. And then the elements. So again, these are global defaults. So you can go in here and set your text, your basic link styling. There's still some weird bugs in this, to be honest, especially with link styling. Um, but and button styling. I still have a situation with how WordPress core default sort of trickle down with button styling, but that's a personal thing. Um, so, but you can go in and set all of these there. There are also font size presets. You can add additional presets. So on some sites, I have an extra small or an extra, extra large. I try to always make medium my default text size and then go up and down from there. And as I'm going up, I try to make large, extra large, whatever, match my header sizes. So, and then small is often like a caption size, and like extra small might be like, I don't know what's smaller than a caption.
Seeing,
Um,
seeing small, medium, large just makes me think of Microsoft when I used it in the day. The old, um, their fonts were all that, or you know what
yeah,
it's called. And
what,
so whenever I see it, I think it's wrong. But I see what they're doing. They're just using the words, but they have a pre front page. Yes. Oh.
yeah, yeah. So I don't love it for that reason. However, I get it, and it actually, I've gotten used to it, and it solves some of the problems of people wanting to adjust their stuff, not knowing how to adjust it. Like You are technically giving them something where they can manually override this unless you disable that, which maybe you should. But um, this way you're giving them choices, and those choices are at minimum following the same spacing as everything else, which is what makes things look professional. So, and then the same with your color palette. So you can set a default, you can take away colors, you can add colors. And then you've got your theme specific colors. These are the default colors below it that come with WordPress core. You can take them away. The name of the plugin is Create Block Theme. And there's also default gradients in there. If you dig in, you will find them. You can also remove those. You can set a background. I finally did this on somebody's site recently. It's the first time. But I wanted to make the background of someone's website look like paper. And so I finally used it. You can do the same thing with shadows. Again, these are just universal defaults. You've got individual block styling. So you can go in and set defaults for individual blocks. And you should. You can also remove things for individual blocks. So like the button block, for example, has like, I don't know how many defaults in terms of block styles. If there's styles you're not using, you should remove them. And that would be later. You would have to do that in your theme.json file. You can't do that through the editor. But if you have an option there, it should have a default that matches your theme. So if you want an outline button, cool, style it. If you don't want one, deregister it. All right, so then this is just basic how to build a website 101, right? So you've done all of your global styling through the editor, which for those of us who like to write CSS is maybe sad, but it's fine. You'll adjust. Um,
It took so
and
long to learn.
I know, right?
Well, I
It's
used to build sites with tables. So
I know.
CSS was really nice to learn at the time.
It So then we determine our content structure. So WordPress default has pages and posts. Posts are what are the blog functionality of WordPress. Pages are standalone. We've got default taxonomies, categories, and tags. We have some custom structures, and this is where WordPress, frankly, is not the ecosystem to learn about this. Um, Drupal does it very, very well. You should go find a talk about custom post types and taxonomies in Drupal. Watch it. You won't understand any of the technical pieces necessarily, but the same concepts apply to WordPress. Most WordPress people don't think about it this way, though. But if you are thoughtful um, about how you structure custom content, your editors will be able to maintain that content. So by that I mean like there's a bunch of sites that I've come across where like every single thing is in posts. And if it's a press release, it's in the category press releases. And if it is a blog post, it's in a category called blog posts. And really having your press releases as their own custom post type and having just your blog posts in your posts is cleaner. Your site editors will not get confused about where a press release should go when there is something called press releases right there. And that's part of maintaining things over time and keeping things internally consistent. Same with custom taxonomies and custom fields. Um, all right, so then you need to define any custom structures. So this is the same as traditional WordPress theming. You make a must-use plugin. Ideally, you could stick it all in your functions file, but that's not really a good thing because if you disable your theme, all of your custom post types will die. So make a custom plugin, stick it in your must-use plugin folder, define your custom structures that way. Then set up your content patterns. At this point, we're often doing migration. So, is there a benefit for SEO doing it like that? Doing which, like what, Eileen?
Do splitting up posts, press releases, and blog posts into custom post types.
Yes. So, some of what that does, you can then customize the slugs.
Okay,
Well, not the slugs, that's the wrong word. The directory path. So, it'll be website.com/press/slug, right? Or
Mhm.
website.com/blog/slug.
Got it.
And that it does have SEO benefits if you do it strategically. And then is that a wise choice to separate your pages for blogs and press releases and projects completed for your customers? So I think it's a wise choice because what I have seen people do when you don't do that is mislabel things. You'll end up with the general thing that I try to think about with this type of thing is humans are always going to just do what they feel like in the moment. They might have a guide, they might have documentation, but when they go to make it, they're not going to read that. They're just going to click a button. And they're going to forget to click a button, right? So something that happens a lot when you don't do this is someone will stick a release in and then they won't check the box that says press release. They'll just publish it. And then someone will go to the press release page and it won't be there. Is it published on the site? Sure. Is it actually labeled as a press release? No. And so over time, this can lead to massive confusion. And fundamentally, that's also why I recommend if you're interested in this particular topic, like I can talk about it all day long. I really like content structure, but there are other places to go and learn more about that. And the Drupal community is really, I think, the best at this particular thing. Um, and that's also a good point Kim just said in the chat. Um, Using the press release example, if it's a custom post type, then you can set it up so that it shows standard press release information, which is something that I've definitely frequently done. So like your media contact blurb at the bottom that's always the same, or the 3 hash signs that are always there, but no one ever types, you know, stuff like that. Okay, so while you're migrating your content, you can also set up your content patterns. And this is something that is very different, but also kind of fun using full site editing. So you can add a few different types of patterns. So on this screen, I have it adding an unsynced pattern. And that is basically a little template for anybody who's using the site to use. And you can stick whatever blocks you want in that pattern. You can style them however you choose, and whoever uses it later will get whatever has been pre-populated. This is great because then you can tell a editorial person, hey, when you're doing this type of story, grab this pattern. And then suddenly all the defaults are there for them and they can work from it in a way that's standardized rather than, what was that thing? Did she say to put a column here? Like, you don't want people who are supposed to be writing sitting around doing that. Okay, then you have synced patterns. A synced pattern is something that if you change it one place, it changes it all the places. So, a good use case for this is a website where you have, say it's a news website, and you have advertisements And say you have issue-based advertisements. And they might not be advertisements for like public-facing things, but like say you have like an internal advertisement for all of your content on a particular topic. If you stick that ad into a synced pattern and always use that pattern in your stories about that topic, if you ever want to change the art for that ad, then you just have to change it one place. And you don't have to go through all of your old content finding your stuff. Um, so that's a lot of how I've seen those used. Also for things like recently built a website for a museum, and they have a few pieces of content that appear everywhere, like their hours, right? Like it could change someday, um, but like there's like 17 million places where they put their hours. So that on their site, it's a very small synced pattern, but it is a synced pattern. And yes, synced patterns can be very useful on membership sites. Um, Anywhere where you have to repeat the same thing over and over. I've even seen editorial teams reuse um, just like, again, really tiny snippets, like the last, like a one line paragraph. Yeah, they're similar to sidebars and widgets, but like they're nice because they can be any size. And you can actually nest them into your other patterns. So if you have a unsynced pattern, you can put a synced pattern in it. All right, so then this is my favorite, the partially synced pattern. In this, you can lock things down and preserve design integrity, which is one of my favorite things. So, yes, exactly. The blurb that says to contact executive director by name, that press contacts are another one. Anything like that. So partially synced patterns, you can lock down things like the colors and the spacing. So if you have a standard like row of content that should always look the same but could have different content in it, you can make a partially synced pattern where somebody could switch out the text and the images but couldn't change the padding. And you do that by going in, it's confusing. You have to make a synced pattern and then make it partially synced. The UI here is not great, but it's possible. And then you enable the overrides. The downside of this is that not all blocks support being modifiable by the end user. So if you were to stick a video block in here, your end user wouldn't be able to upload different videos. But if you were to stick an image block in here, your end user could overwrite the image with whatever image they want. So some blocks support it, some don't. It's, again, this is on the newer side, but it can be useful. Okay, then you populate and migrate your content into these patterns that you've started to make. And making them while you're populating and migrating is often the most efficient because that's when you discover what you need. So, and then at the same time, setting up template variations. And this is something that is very different from traditional WordPress theming, but the logic is the same. So again, you're in the site editor, which feels wrong, and you go to add template, and you look at them and you're suddenly like, this looks a whole lot like the template hierarchy. It's following the exact same logic. So if you need something, all you need to do is look at that traditional structure of the template hierarchy and either find it here or create a custom template, and the options in custom template are the same as in the template hierarchy. this is what I've been talking about if you're not familiar with the template hierarchy. But this is a structure to see what template a website built in WordPress will inherit um, based on which templates are present within the theme. And then you set up your header and footer. You can add headers and footers and you can add variants. So I often will add synced patterns or semi-synced patterns as part of headers so that like, especially like on a multilingual site where like you got different languages, but all the art is always going to be the same. This could be a component, and that's often how I've used it. Um, then you get into navigation, which has improved significantly over time, but it's still a little weird. It's completely different from traditional like admin menus. It's not in the same place. It confuses clients. Clients who are used to the old way will try to find their menus and they can't, and then they get freaked out. So, heads up. Um, but you, and what part of what's scary about this is that you actually have to teach your clients to go into some of this stuff. So, again, risk tolerance. Um, my risk tolerance is very high. Those of you who have known me for a long time know that that's true. And but I try to be really responsible in where I take the risks when I'm building something that's going to be taken over by other people, right?
The
So,
menu that the client still has, see, that kind of was an
but
issue with the menu before too, that like anything had access to all that.
yeah, so there's a way around it here that I've used, and I'll show you in a minute.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But like, there are absolutely clients where I'm like Charlie. So for any of you who know Charlie from Pan Manor School District, um, he is very technically comfortable. And so with him, I was like, Charlie, here are where the header partials are. This is how it works. And he was like, cool, cool. But a less technical client, I may not do that. Um, Given permissions capabilities, do you have to grant the client's user roles? That's an excellent question. And it's not one I actually know offhand because of my philosophy related to user roles. So I give all of my clients have admin access. I have clients who are uncomfortable with their admin access, and then I make them have two of themselves. One that's an admin and one that is whatever level they actually need to do what they're doing. And so I'm teaching them how to do all of this in admin mode, um, which also involves a speech about, I literally go through the WordPress dashboard with them and show them which parts they shouldn't touch. And I'm like, you can, it's yours, but don't come crying to me if you get in here and mess everything up. And it's been at least a decade of doing this, and I've actually never had anybody mess it up. But I do give folks who are uncomfortable a second user with lower permissions. But I really think it's important. I have dealt with too many situations inheriting websites from somebody else where it turns out that the client never actually had admin access to anything. And that's wrong. So it's a bit of a side tangent, but you know, um, so the menus are all in blocks. They're in navigation blocks, and you can add them to your header and you can nest them and all of this. Okay, fun. To actually manage them though, you can change alignment, there's display functions. I don't know why the default is 2 lines. It also lets you make it 3 lines. Um, but down here, the purple arrow, Manage Menus takes you to a more traditional navigation location where you can actually manage your menus in a sane way. Um, Maybe the UI will get better in context of the editor, but it's still, it's not super elegant at this point. So this does exist. Once all of that is set up, then you go into Create Block Theme, which has been sitting there the whole time, and you export something. What do you export? It depends on what you're doing. So in this scenario where we have Blockbase installed as the parent, the child is what we're going for. So create child of Blockbase is what I would pick. And then it will make all of those defaults you set into the theme files you need and give it to you as a zip file. You can create a clone, you can create a new blank theme, you can export the theme you have as a zip file. So once I'm into something and I'm past this and I have my child theme enabled rather than the parent, because the next step here is installing the child theme and enabling that instead of the parent theme, right? So if I were to go and do this again, I would export whatever my child theme is as a zip file, and I would just swap my files in for the old ones. And I'll explain that in a second. So you go there, you tell people what you're doing. Then you go into your theme and remove unwanted defaults. There are defaults that you didn't set that will be in there. So look through your theme.json files, see what they are, and decide if you actually like them. And then you want to add your additional configurations. When you start Googling what's possible, there's a lot more than what is in the editor that you can do in the actual theme. And this is where I am starting. Like, I'm starting to have a collection of things that will become a base theme. But it's not going to be a base theme in the traditional sense because I want all the custom stuff exported first. So it's going to be more like a collection of snippets that I add, right? It's a little different. Then set up your custom block styles. Make sure you're actually styling anything that is already there. These are custom ones that you have to register in your theme. This is a screenshot of one of the only ones I always add to every site. And it's the same thing that we are talking about with the font sizing of like everybody in the whole world wants everything to look like an H3. And guess what? It's not. SEO, accessibility, all of these things need to have proper header hierarchy, but giving people the ability to have things that look like an H2, no matter what they are, solves some of that problem. What happens if you have a site and you just want to change it around a little? Do you have to create in the child theme? The best practice is to do so. If you do not, there is a possibility that the theme you're using would be updated by whomever published it and that your changes would be overwritten. So that's why child themes are a thing, because it's sad when you lose your work by surprise. And then I add tooling for compiling CSS and JavaScript. You can see this is our standard workflow. So we've got some composer stuff, and I can go into this if anyone's really interested, but we've got other stuff that compiles things, and that's that. And then this also shows what we are version controlling. So we're version controlling just the theme and just our custom plugin. all of the other plugins, WordPress core, all of the others, like it's not necessary. Pantheon does version control every godforsaken thing, and it's horrible. It is overkill. Um, and there are some people that do it, but it is just so much more to maintain than it needs to be. So that was a little more editorial than maybe it should have been, but I'm okay with that. Um, then, write any custom CSS and JavaScript you need. This is more it's like, then you're just building like you would build anything, right? And build any custom blocks you need. This is not the subject of this talk, but in terms of the process, this is when you would do it. One of the things that we are doing is starting to open source little blocks we make. So this is an extension for Restrict Content Pro that we use a lot, that basically works on permission levels for a specific block. I think we did this because we had to change who could see something in the header on a site, whether you were logged in or logged out. And then use block bindings to output custom fields where appropriate in templates. And this is something where the documentation is terrible. If you try to do it and you have trouble, let me know. We have an article in development that once my company has a blog will actually be published, because we taught ourselves how to do this and it was painful. But basically, you need to create the ability for your custom fields to show up in the right places in your Gutenberg block templates. And that's the part that's painful to learn. But Stacy, who is a developer on my team, and I have been working on documentation to hopefully help other people not do what we did. Okay. And then integrate any additional custom functionality. You're going to have non-Gutenberg plugins potentially. That's fine. Do your QA, standard processes for that. This is what, I don't know whose theme this is. I blurted out because I didn't want to share. But this is what a custom theme file structure, going back to the very beginning and looking at all those file structures we looked at, can look like. So at the end of the day, some of these directories are created by Create Block Theme, like the patterns and templates and that stuff. But facets, for example, that's because the site that this is from is using Facet WP. And if you want to customize your facet output, you can use their inline editor thing for some basic stuff. But if you want to get really fancy, you need to write your own PHP file. So this is just an example of what it can look like when you're done. Where do you put all the things? I've touched on this a little bit. The database, your site content. So what is the database, right? Okay, so that's your site content. It's also your dashboard configurations, your plugin settings, anything that you have stuck in custom CSS, and your customizer code. Making sure that this stays synced with your actual theme is the hardest part, because stuff you will do if you decide, oh, you know what, I want my container width to be 1440 instead of 1360. Well, that's a database change until you write it to your theme.json file. And so that's why that exporting to like sync up your changes, when I mentioned that and people were confused, that's when you do that. When you're like, I have done something to make this different. It's going to have, when you export it that way, it's going to have everything you've done in the admin and all of the stuff you had from your theme. So it's going to just change the new stuff and give you the fresh file. And I I do not try to, I just swap it. I export it and swap it because I know that as a human brain, I don't need to do that. Your files, WordPress core, your plugins, themes, uploads, config, all of this is the same as it's always been. It goes on your server. your local, lives happily, and then your code, just your theme and just your plugin and any other custom thing you do. You could have more than one custom plugin, is why I say that, goes in your version control. After swapping, does anything need to be compiled? That's an excellent question. And the answer is no, because all of your custom CSS should be in your theme. You need a few environments. This is standard workflow for any development, a local copy, a development site to do like whatever crazy ideas you've got you want to try, staging to test before it goes live, and production, which is also the database of record, which you should never touch unless it gets hacked. That's a whole other talk. Okay. Keys to theming sanity. Use Git. I use GitHub, but there's alternatives. Version control can be scary when it's new, but it is a lifesaver when you're working either overtime by yourself or with other humans. So pretty much you could become your other human. Your web host, and I have no comments on which ones are good or not. I use local, which used to be local by Flywheel. It's now, if you Google local WP, that's the way to find it. And your code should only go in the theme. So if you have an emergency and you need to put a hotfix in your customizer CSS, fine, but move it to your theme when you have like a sane moment. And then this, I will share the slides. This is for reference for later if you want to look at it. This is a crazy detailed chart of the deployment workflow that we use and also the lower environment refresh workflow.
Very
So
kind that you'll share that with us. Read it
sure,
here.
sure thing. Yeah, like it's crazy detailed, but it's I have an internal philosophy of making sure as I'm teaching a new developer something new that they genuinely understand it. And I have somebody who is so visual and so detailed. And I did this for them because no matter how many times I describe this out loud, it never stuck. And so once I made this, I actually haven't received questions about this in like well over a year. All right. So in general, pay attention to how you and your team works. This is not going to be a universal, like you may not do it exactly the way I do it. That's fine. There's a many ways to do it, the different orders, all that. You need to remember that you also need workflows for custom functionality so that you're not doing one-off things every time. Keep documentation. It can be one of the forms of documentation that I've made a lot lately is like a site style guide that's a privately published page that has all the headings on it. Here's all the colors. Here are our template patterns labeled so that someone can go there and just look at it. Write code only when you need to. This can be hard, especially when you know how to do it the other way. And then open source what you can, because otherwise no one is ever going to learn this stuff. Thank you, Dave. Um, and overall, keep it as simple as you can. I know that I just went through like a bajillion things,
Built.
and it's a lot, and it doesn't sound simple. But I promise that if you play with it, it starts. The last year or so has been the first time in probably 6 or 7 years where I have felt like, okay, I know how to do this. I'm following best practices. This is the correct way to do it. And I think that transitional period where themes were very much hybrid really created a lot of complexity, and some of the need for that is going away, which is great. Um, and then here's my information. You can find me. You can email me. And this is on Blue Sky. If you find me on Twitter, I won't acknowledge you because I'm not there anymore. Um, so, um, and if you have questions, honestly, reach out. I probably won't respond right away. You'll probably hear from somebody else because I am incapable of checking my email. Um, but I
And
will get there
yeah.
eventually.
And if you're also, if you're not part of our Lehigh Valley Slack community, we don't have tons going on right now, but every once in a while, you can anybody who's DM me your email address, do an invite, and then you can always reach out there. People we have around or
Yeah.
can help a bit too. But watching you do this, like I watched you do this in June, which like opened my eyes. Kind of a light finally went on after watching Courtney do it a couple times, and so I know what you're saying about. I just have to do it. I just have to sit down.
Yeah. You
Now I
just
feel
have
like
to.
I have a guide. Like, okay, start here.
Yeah. And one thing I've been playing around with, we haven't announced this yet, but if you go to our website, which is in the slides, and sign up for our newsletter, when we do announce it, it'll be in there. Um, one of the things we are going to start doing is having open office hours for like general Q&A. And one of the core philosophies that I have, I'm a self-taught developer. And some of the folks on this call have known me since like before I could barely write a link. And it is very hard and it's a lot of work to learn this profession. And it is impossible if you don't have anybody to ask questions of. And for anybody like I I'm in the unique situation where I have hired both my mentor and my mentee. And um what I tell what my original mentor told me was like, look, I will teach you everything I know, but you need to continue passing it forward, right? Particularly to people who don't have access or the privilege of access to that information. And so that's a lot of the
You
core of
this.
what
I
we
don't know
do.
if you can see it in your window.
Yeah, I can.
That's when I
Oh my
met you,
gosh. That's true.
2015.
WordCamp New York City
Yeah.
2015. Kim sat at my
I
table.
kept the poster. It's full of desks.
Um, so yeah, I've also got a few additional resources in the slides at the end, um, that are things that I
Are
have
you going to
found.
share these slides? The URL?
I will share the slides.
Yeah.
I need
If you
to
put them there, I'll put them.
Yep. So I will share the slides and then, yeah, I mean, the core idea here is that, yes, it's a lot. Yes, it's very different. There's also a lot of philosophical, structural things that are the same. So those parallels have helped me a lot in being confident and knowing, like, where do I go with this thing? How should I do this? Right? The questions that we all have. And frankly, the blog ecosystem is not like I linked to all the stuff that I regularly refer to. People don't have the time to write that they used to, or they're not writing, or I don't know what they're doing, but they're not writing about it. Um, and so there's just
Yeah.
not, and it goes back to what Kim was saying in the very beginning of like, I I learned to code by taking buses to anywhere I could go and sleeping on couches and watching every talk that I could and absorbing and absorbing at conferences.
A lot
Um,
of different opinions, a lot of
yeah,
solid things, like people you knew who were in the world, like in the development world, doing this as a, they do it, and that's how they do it, and
yeah, and it's just different now. Like that ecosystem doesn't exist the way it did. I'm really lucky that I was able to be there at that time to have been able to grow the way I did because of it. But we're in a period now with both the world and also WordPress in general of like, how do we refactor this so that we can still share information? And that's part of why I wanted to do office hours because that cross-pollination of ideas is so important. And like, there is no reason that somebody should be sitting there stuck for a bajillion years because they have a little question where if they came and asked Kim or if they happened to talk to me, we would be like, oh yeah, over here. Like it's just,
yeah, just pointing in the right way.
yeah.
I'm going to
So
stop the recording. Thank you very much. But I mean, we
you're
can continue on,
welcome.
but I'm just going to stop it because it's going to be very long. I think that's right. Thank you very much, Beth, for joining us. I appreciate it.
Oh,